Nima's choice of that clip is a very, very smart, right? To have the Ford family, which is really the family out of which the American car industry grew, right? Henry Ford, way back when, at the beginning of the 20th century, creates the assembly line and makes it possible to mass produce this odd thing, a self-driving automobile instead of a horse and a carriage. Okay, so here you have the latest generation, a young man who you would expect, if he were like Trump, would be beating the drum of nationalism, is answering an honest question by saying, you know, we don't produce the best cars. We don't have the best technology. We can't compete. I mean, after you listen to him describe what the Chinese car on the average can do, I know enough, and I don't know anything, but I know enough about American cars. They can't do that. They can't do those things, and they're more expensive. And we are completely lost on the electric vehicle market. I mean, wow! From the mouth of Mr. Ford, you know what that suggests to me as an observer? That the car industry in this country is finished. Cars, whatever their role in the world economy in the years ahead, are going to be made much better elsewhere. Maybe the image of the United States is we're so important, even though we are, let me remind everyone, 4.5% of the world's people live in the United States. 4.5%. What, we're going to have an economy all by ourselves? You know what that means? We're going to be the oddity that now you can see on television when a camera crew goes deep into the Amazonian jungle or deep somewhere else and discovers a community that has been living, you know, the same way for 5,000 years. We're going to be one of those. The rest of the world is going to send tourists here. That'll be our new economic boom, the tourism, to look at these ancient automobiles these people still have. You know, I'm not being facetious. That's where we're going with this policy. Yeah, let's do a very quick economics of why it can't last. When you protect the American economy from the Chinese, whether you use the electric vehicles or you use solar panels or you use advanced AI equipment and so on, it's always the same story. You protect it here by excluding the Chinese. Well, what does that mean? It means that where the Chinese have broken into the American market, it is because they produce either a better quality or offer a lower price or both. That's all. That's it. There's no magic. No one's holding a gun to anybody's head. That's how and why, you know, the toaster you have at home is made in China, and on and on and on, because that's a cheaper, better toaster than anybody else makes, which is why Walmart has it for sale, or Target, or any of the others. So now let's follow the economics. If you exclude that, you make Americans buy poorer quality or pay a higher price. That's not good. That's bad. That's bad for the consumer, but no one really cares about them except in words. Let's turn next to American businesses, or for that matter, to any businesses operating here in America. They have to buy inputs, you know, raw materials, machines, parts, whatever it is. And where are they going to buy them from? They're not going to get the good, cheap ones from abroad because the government of the United States has put a tariff. That's the point of the tariff. So the American business will not be able to buy as its raw material or its parts or its inputs, it will not be able to buy from China because we're in this competition, which means it can't get the cheapest or the best quality. But of course, the competitors of the United States, located in Canada or Mexico or anywhere else in the world, are able to go to China and are able to buy at the lower price the better quality. So over time, America is shooting itself in the foot competitively. It's losing, and not by the hand of anybody else, but by its own. It is following a policy that may be good for the posturing of Mr. Trump. I'm bringing industry back. No, you aren't. The industries aren't coming, and they're not coming because of what I just said, that in the long run, it makes no sense to come back here because you'll have to not be able to buy the cheapest input or the highest quality. Why would you move to a country which promises you competitive disadvantages? That's why American companies went abroad in the first place, because it was more profitable. You are giving them a reason not to come back. Why this is so difficult, I assume, is not because the idea is complex. It isn't. But because of the noise from the Trump administration, but sadly not contradicted by the vast majority of Democrats and their spokespersons. So it is allowed to give this man, Trump, the posture opportunity as if he was doing good for the American economy. He isn't. It may be bad in any case. I'm not blaming him for it. But what he's doing is really nonsensical self-promotion and making the problem worse.
Well, only one technical question, Richard. How can you shoot yourself in the foot if you've first shot yourself in the brain? It doesn't work that way.
I mean, this is not complicated. There are things in economics that are complicated. This isn't one of them. This is not that. It's really sad. It's almost as if we had a person who was president who said, I'm going to solve our economic problems. I'm going to erect a 6-foot tall tower, and I'm going to hang yellow streamers, and I'm going to have an enormous amount of whipped cream put on top. And we would listen to such a person, and we would all shake our heads. How demented, how sad for him to imagine that a real problem, the declining American economic system, could be managed by this fantasy. Well, I got to tell you, with all my fancy economic degrees, I'm looking at a program that's ridiculous. The use of nationalism. And I think for an American audience, it is particularly important to understand how nationalism has been used as the cover for people with an agenda we ought to be horrified by, and not allow them to use nationalism. And that's really what this is. Mr. Netanyahu wants to equate the national notion he has of Israel with the obligation of every Jewish person around the world. That's a ploy that is very common among nationalists. That's how they recruit. That's how they sustain their movements, by suggesting that you have to be like them if you're going to wear the label, French or Spanish or Jewish or anything else. And we should be, we've gone through enough in the last 200 years. 2 world wars with awful lot of nationalism. Let me close with a story. When World War I broke out in 1914, the German parliament was roughly equally split between the Socialist Party, which by then was the number 2 party in Germany and controlled over 40% of the seats in the parliament. Okay? Kaiser Wilhelm, who, by the way, wasn't Kaiser by the end of the war, but in the beginning of the war, he was still the Kaiser, the Tsar, the king, if you like. The German version of that is Kaiser. Kaiser Wilhelm went on the radio and he said something that became very famous in German history. I'm going to do it in German, then I'll translate it in English, right? Ich kenne keine Sozialisten. Ich kenne nur Deutsche. I do not recognize anything known as a socialist. I only recognize Germans. There it was. To mobilize the people to fight a world war which Germany lost, he had to try to overcome what? The fact that the Socialist Party, at least on record, was against fighting a war and would have voted against funding it. To stop that, he had to make everybody into a loyal German. To prevent Jewish people, and let me remind everyone, not just outside of Israel, but a huge part of the Jewish population in Israel is against what is going on. They consider themselves Jews. That's the part I'm talking about. They consider themselves Israelis, and they consider themselves patriotic Israelis. And in many ways they are. But they are the sworn political enemies of Netanyahu and much, unfortunately not all, but much of what Netanyahu stands for. As you can see if you paid attention to Mr. Netanyahu's failed efforts to transform the judiciary in Israel and his failed efforts to win a large part of the Jewish population. It is therefore doubly ironic that people who are critical of Mr. Netanyahu and of the war have an easier time in Israel than they do in New York or Philadelphia or Los Angeles. And that's because and this is my final thing, I promise. The anti-Semitic nonsense is a cover, not just for Mr. Netanyahu, but for Mr. Trump. The Republicans and the Trump, they just voted to defund public radio and public television. That's who they are. They don't want public anything. They want everything to be handled either by the business community, that's their first choice, or by the paid representatives, that's the religious community. Well, one or the other. They don't want an independent, they don't want a government that is representative in any way of the mass of people. And they want to smash national public radio. They did it. They want to smash the universities that train people to think at least critically enough to be not amenable to MAGA mentality. The anti-Semitism is purely the thinnest of fig leaves covering what is a political agenda of the extreme right wing, who sees this moment as the first in a century, and they need to milk it for everything they can get before Mr. Trump is ushered out into the pantheon of horrible experiences right alongside of Joseph McCarthy. Yeah, let me approach it from a slightly different angle. Mr. Trump promised many times while he was campaigning that he could and would bring an end to the war in Ukraine. To this day, he refers to it as Biden's war because he's so eager not to be responsible. It's a weak way of defending himself that here we are half a year since he's been president, and he's not one iota closer to ending the war in Ukraine than he was when he took office. So how do you fix, in the way American politics works, how do you fix a screaming failure? Well, you pick on whatever aspect of it that you can find where you can do something, so that you try then to do that and make it look like you're doing what you're supposed to. Well, one of the reasons the Republican and right-wing and conservative parts of the United States were not happy with the Ukraine war was the point that Michael just made. Namely, it's the old guns versus butter, that it was costing a ton of money for the United States to support Ukraine financially, politically, and militarily. And that this was our money, tax money, and so that was part of the argument. So he can do something there. He can make the Europeans pay, so it isn't we who pay. And he can get up and talk about, see, I got them to pay, we don't pay, and hope that by talking about that, he can distract us from the fact that he didn't promise to make them pay. He promised to bring the awful war to an end. Remember how many times he said, to the consternation of the whole world, that he wanted the war in Ukraine to end because people, I quote you now, are dying over there. And the whole world pointed out that more people are dying in Gaza than are dying in Ukraine. If dying is an issue, you're not exactly consistent here. No, it made no difference. People are dying, and he's going to bring it to an end. He's not. And this week was the failure of failures. Every effort he tried, there'll be no ceasefire until they do what Putin asked them to do. They're not prepared to do that, so we don't have a ceasefire. The war continues. What is he going to do? He promised to do what he cannot and will not do. The conclusion, how does he square that circle? By making an enormous issue about having the Europeans pay. And the Europeans, having not yet decided to make the break with the United States, mumble and bumble and fumble, and yes, we will, and whether they do or not, whether Mr. Merz can even stay in office, I should remind people, he didn't win by a lot. This is no landslide. This is no mandate holder. This is a slim politician in a precarious situation. It's very open how many dollars or euros will ever find their way into these programs. But for the soundbite, to ease Mr. Trump's political difficulties, Mr. Merz will go along because he wants Mr. Trump to help him in a variety of ways as well. So that's what this is. This is an arrangement with lots of verbiage, lots of word salad to cover over a temporary fix that solves absolutely nothing. I just want to acknowledge that is possible. You know, the way diplomacy and the way the American government particularly works, all we ever do is guess. All you get from Michael and me are the best guesses we can make, reading a ton of material and trying not to be too easily fooled. But so much information is withheld that it's this endless, it's the politics of speculation. Look at all the stuff about Epstein. It's the same thing. We don't know tens of millions of pieces of information that might make it a bit easier to figure out what's going on. We are denied that. And that's very unhealthy and gives the people in charge a lot more freedom to fool around with us than we ought to allow if we took our commitment to democracy seriously. He can do good by them, give them the option. If they wish to be anonymized, okay, then everything is cleansed up with them. But if he really wants there not to be the suspicion that he's doing something stinky, well, he has the authority. It stops with him. He can order his attorney general or anybody else to open these files. What? And that, in the end, and I love the irony. I'm a bit of an Hegelian. I love the irony, right? There's Mr. Big and Powerful. There he is working night and day to make us understand he rules the world. He can hit this country with a tariff. He can bomb over here. All the old dying empires' efforts to keep its empire alive. And yet, when it comes here, he has to deny himself his own power. He has to use his power and use it in a way that makes everyone think less of him, that leaves him. He's not going to escape, no matter what happens now, right? If Steve Bannon and all the others look at Mr. Johnson, the head of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives. He said he wanted the files released, and literally minutes later voted against having them released. This is the power turned in on itself and makes itself undone. It is the self-negation that Mr. Hegel talked to us about. Yes, we have in the law the idea that if you are, and only if you are, immediately threatened with bodily harm, that you feel genuinely that your life is in danger, only then do you have anything remotely like the right to self-defense. Israeli bombing of citizens in Gaza who are not shooting at them, who have no means to shoot at them, who have been without any means in any significant way for years to be subject to mass slaughter, cannot be justified by pointing out something that was done by a very small political group called Hamas 2 years ago. This violates, as Michael said, every basic notion of what is just, what is fair, what is allowable in the extreme case of feeling self-defense. And you cannot generalize from what someone in October of 2023 did to a fellow citizen of yours is never, in any law that I know of that isn't crazy, allowable as a justification for taking mass amounts of other people's lives. During World War II, it was very frequent to denounce the Nazis when, having been attacked by some partisan group, they collected all of the adult citizens in a village and shot them. This notion that we the Germans, being put upon by some partisans, therefore have some right to mass slaughter of people who were not involved in that effort, who were not subjected to any legal procedure to link them. We are now celebrating people doing what not so long ago we decided was beyond the pale. I want to remind you, in the Nuremberg trials and their aftermath, the whole world sat in judgment for months, deliberating in a way that the people they were judging never did, but deliberating, allowing witnesses, before it was decided that the crimes committed, and there was specific reference to the mass killing of people who had not done anything. And those people were executed. The leaders, Goering, Goebbels, the people they were able to catch were executed by the West as a sign of the utter unacceptability of this behavior.
Yeah.
It's also the tragedy of Europe is somehow even more poignant for me than the American. And I should, to be transparent, I was born and lived all my life in the United States, but my parents were refugees. They came from Europe. And so I straddle in the sense that my parents are European and I'm an American, and I have children and they're American and all that. But Europe was once the center of the known world because it did the knowing and it was the center. So it was the center of what it knew. And, it carved up the whole world. I remember once studying the meetings in Berlin in 1884, where all the European countries had a big map of Africa and made lines with markers. You get this, I get that, having nothing to do with the billion people that lived in Africa at the time. Extraordinary, really extraordinary. And it's all gone. It's all gone. They can't unify, so they don't even have the power that a unified unit might have. So they don't even have that. They're pinched by the Chinese and Russians on one end, by the Americans on the other, and the third world has declared anti-colonialism is Israel and Gaza stand out as the final desperate attempt to hold on to the colonial idea and project, and look at the price being paid, the lesson to the world. If you ever wanted an example of why you should get rid of colonialism, here, So the Europeans, they face nothing but defeat after defeat after defeat. And they deny it and they pretend otherwise. When the Queen of England dies and a new king, they actually act as if anybody cared, as if the world would be interested in the cortege that takes the Queen to her final resting place. This is a theater piece for ancient times, held on to by people who have nothing else. The catastrophe here is real, and I understand the danger. Societies traumatized by anything can behave in a horrible way. The German working class, as I've tried to write recently, was traumatized. It was led to believe in the 19th century that it was going to inherit the world, that the British Empire was fading and Deutsche Reich, the German Empire, would replace it. And they were led to believe it. And German economic development in the 19th century was like America. Those were the two up-and-coming contenders to replace the British Empire. And then in a very short time, the German working class was destroyed by being defeated in World War I. 5 years later, they had the worst inflation in modern history, wiped out their savings. And 4 years after that, the Great Depression of 1929 hit. In a short period, they were traumatized by three totally destructive events. No wonder they went for Adolf Hitler. That's what happens if you traumatize. Look what happened to people in Cambodia after the United States bombed them forever. They went to Pol Pot, and what was that? You traumatize a population. Too many defeats, too many declines, too much absence of any change, and you can get very bizarre. Let's assume he does what he says, a 25% tariff on anything produced in Mexico, we'll start with that, brought into the United States for sale. That imported from Mexico item will be subject to a tariff of 25%. So let's take an example. You buy an avocado because you really like it on toast. You buy an avocado for $1. You've been doing that for a while. Avocados overwhelmingly come from Mexico. Now, after tomorrow, if he does what he said he would do, and like you said, Jordan, maybe he will, maybe he won't. He's very ups and downsy with this. But 25% means that as of tomorrow, that same avocado that you got today for $1, you're going to have to pay $1.25. The dollar will go to Mexico to pay for the avocado. The quarter, the tariff, is money you as an American will be sending to Washington, which means that the Republican Party, which has advocated tax cuts for the last century, is now a big champion of a humongous tax increase. What will be the effect of that? Well, here we go. One effect might be that Americans are so in love with avocados and so in love with avocados from Mexico that they will continue to buy them. And Uncle Sam, or in this case, Uncle Don, will get 25 cents for every avocado Americans buy. So we will continue to have them. The president will have more revenue for the government. Good for him. And we will all have a real boost to our inflation because that item has now just gone up, and not by a little, by a lot. Now multiply this by all the goods that come from Mexico, and there are loads of them. You know why? Because of NAFTA, which is now 30 years old. For 30 years, companies have moved production to Mexico because you could pay low wages in Mexico, produce something, bring it into the United States without paying a tax. So we get lots of stuff from Mexico. For example, automobiles, and not just the whole car, but all the parts, which means as of tomorrow, the cost of automobiles is going to shoot up by a lot because a lot of our cars come from Mexico, and those that don't come from Mexico, they come from Canada, which is the same story. So we're going to see, whoa, you know what that means? Not just that your car will go up, but it means your taxi ride, which is in a car, will go up because the cost of the taxi. Everyone that's replaced because it has an accident or it's old will now have to pay a lot more. And that means everything that comes to you in a vehicle, because Mexico and Canada also produce trucks. Now the inflation in this country is going to shoot up. Mr. Trump poo-poos that. The tariffs are the big thing that's new in the world of the government's taxing. But of course, it really isn't new. Tariffs have been part of American history from the beginning. But tariffs are now important because it's the only way left for the government to raise some money. And let's see who will end up paying it. A tariff is a tax on goods that are brought in to the United States. They have to be paid by the businesses who bring in goods. You know, Walmart that brings in the goods that you can buy at the Walmart store, or Amazon that collects goods from around the world and then shovels them to you. All the companies that make things in America that have parts that have to be brought from around the world. For example, all of our automobile companies, all of our appliance companies, those that we have left. So it's companies, American companies, that bring the goods in, and foreign companies who have operations here who bring the goods in. Those companies pay Uncle Sam the tariff. But now here comes the good or the horrible news, depending on whether you're a corporation or a worker. If you're a corporation, what you do is pay that tariff and then raise the price of whatever you sell to recover for yourself what you have to give to Uncle Sam. So who in the end pays for the tariff? You and I, the American consumer. Who else has the new ugly tax bill targeted? Well, whoever the Republicans don't like. Big, rich universities. You know, the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons and all of them, they're seeing a nice big tax hike. Why? Because the government doesn't like them. The people who come out of them with educations don't seem to like the Republicans all that much either, and therefore they get whacked. It's not a very large amount of money that we're talking about, but the symbolism is enough. You can see who the Republicans are going after to try to solve the problem they made worse by borrowing all those years and by letting corporations and the rich keep reducing what they pay. It puts all the rest of us in a terrible bind. And finally, what do we see? The government going through and firing all those federal employees, cutting the budget, destroying the education department, canceling foreign aid, wiping out. Why? Because they're not willing to tax corporations and the rich, and the corporations and the rich won't even lend them anymore the money because they're too in debt. So they're going to cut savagely across the board and pretend it doesn't cost us anything. You want to know one of the reasons why the rest of the world is changing its attitude towards the United States? It's because we're not doing foreign aid. Oh yeah, our religions may tell us help those, quote, less fortunate than yourself. But we just cut that back, or we allowed a leader in our name to do that. That's going to cost us around the world. We are not in the position we were. And this tax cut panders to the richest amongst us at our expense. And let me assure you, the prices will be going up to make us pay for all the circus of tariffs that Mr. Trump has been treating us to over the last 6 months. Mr. Trump didn't invest what's going on. He's only the latest with his Republican dominance of the two houses of Congress in pushing through the burden of taxes being shifted yet again from the rich corporations and those individuals they make rich, off of them and onto all the rest of us, the middle class, the working class, the poor, whatever it is you want to call them. And this latest bill does that even worse than before. And that ugliness, because that's what it is, it's ugly to treat people in this way, especially after we've had 40 to 50 years of a massive redistribution of wealth from the bottom and the middle to those at the top. They have no decency there. They have no shame. They're grabbing it all. And this tax law, as I'm going to show you, is another step in this awful, ugly direction. So here we go, and we'll keep it very simple. There are two sources of the taxes that find their way to the federal government. One of them are the taxes paid by businesses, a profits tax. You might think of it as the income tax for business. Their income is called their profit. It's a profits tax. And the other tax is on you and me, on working people. It comes out of our salaries and our wages, directly or indirectly, when we earn them, when we spend them. That varies, but it's not a fundamental difference. The real issue is, excuse me, who pays? Corporations and the rich on the one hand, or all the rest of us, the vast majority, on the other. Now, there was a time in American history, more than once, but most recently, right after World War II, in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, when corporations and the rich were required to pay significant amounts of taxes. Oh, it's not that they hadn't shifted on to us beforehand. They had. No sooner was an income tax passed early in the 20th century than corporations and the rich went to work across the entire last century to shift it. But as late as the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, corporations and the rich paid significant amounts. They don't anymore. It's really important that you understand that. Here's how it went. First, the corporations and the rich used their wealth to make donations to the politicians, to hire the lobbyists to work on the politicians who get elected, to change the law, to cut the taxes that they have to pay. Okay, when the government does that, excuse me, when the government does that, it then has to follow suit by accommodating the cut in taxes it's given to corporations and the rich. And how does the federal government do it? It finds somebody else to tax, or it cuts spending, but on who? On you and me. It dare not cut the spending on the corporations and the rich, because that's why corporations and the rich give them all that money to get into office so they don't mess with corporations and the rich. So over the years, the taxes on us somehow find a way of going up, whereas the taxes on corporations and the rich go down. But if you cut taxes on corporations and the rich, and if you raise them on the rest of us, you get a tax revolt from the people. And we've had that in America for the last 30 or 40 years. Doesn't work all the time, but it puts a limit on how much the government can tax us. We're not willing, and that's a good thing about us, we're not willing to sit there and be patsies as the corporations and the rich get one humongous tax cut after another. So now the government has limits. It can't cut on us, the people. It can't get more taxes out of us, the people. So what does it do? First defense, and that's becoming enormous now, is to borrow money. That way the government doesn't have to tax the corporations and the rich, and it doesn't raise our taxes as much as might provoke a revolt, and it solves the problem by borrowing. And as I have tried to stress so many times, you can understand high finance when I tell you simply, who do the government borrow from? And the answer is corporations and the rich. Why? Because they don't have to pay taxes and can use the money they were going to pay to the government if they were taxed fairly to instead give the government a loan. If you're rich or a corporation, this is called a no-brainer. Instead